and glacier gravel just like you find all over New York State when you pop a shovel in the ground. I went back upstairs to get ready for work and saw one big dead housefly floating on its back inside one of the bottles I sealed. It felt creepy. One night, my uncle decided to stop by his favorite local bar after a long week of work. It was one of those dimly lit, cozy places where the bartender knew most of the regulars by name and even remembered their usual orders. My uncle wasn't particularly looking for company. He just wanted a drink and a bit of time to unwind. But as he sat down at the bar, a man beside him struck up a conversation. The man seemed genuinely friendly and easygoing. He was well-spoken, charming in a subtle way, and had an easy smile that made my uncle feel at ease. They started talking about everything and anything that crossed their minds, from the weather to the latest sports scores, and even a little bit about their lives. My uncle remembered thinking it was unusual to feel that comfortable with a complete stranger, especially in a bar. But something about this man made him feel relaxed. Over the next few weeks, they bumped into each other again at the bar a few more times. Each time they would chat, sometimes for hours, sharing stories, laughing at jokes, and occasionally opening up about life's struggles and dreams. My uncle didn't learn too much personal information about him. The guy was somewhat private, but he figured everyone has their boundaries. Still, my uncle grew to genuinely like him. In fact, he even mentioned the man to a couple of family members, describing him as a really nice guy he'd been chatting with at the bar. Then, one evening, my uncle went to the bar, hoping to see his friend and catch up. But the man wasn't there. My uncle shrugged it off, thinking he probably had other plans that night. But as weeks went by, and then months, he noticed that he hadn't seen his friend in quite a while. He asked the bartender about him, but nobody seemed to know much about where the man had gone. Maybe he'd moved to another city or found a new favorite bar, my uncle thought. Life moved on, and the memory of his friend became just one of those casual encounters that drift away with time. Months later, life was back to normal, and my uncle hadn't thought about his old bar friend for quite a while. Then, one day, he received a letter from the county courthouse summoning him for jury duty. He didn't think much of it, as it was a typical civic duty that most people got called to at some point. He marked his calendar and, on the scheduled day, showed up at the courthouse, expecting the usual process. Wait around, listen to some briefings, and possibly sit through a mundane case or two. However, as he entered the courtroom and took his seat among the jury pool, he noticed that the atmosphere was unusually tense. He could feel a strange energy in the room, a sense of heaviness. Curious, he leaned over to a fellow potential juror and whispered, "Do you know what this case is about?" The person beside him looked at him with wide eyes and muttered, "It's a big one. They say it's for a suspected serial killer." My uncle's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to be part of trying to shake off the nerves. He sat up straight, focusing on the case that was about to unfold. Then, as the court session began, the doors opened, and the accused was escorted into the room by security. My uncle turned to see the man being led into the courtroom and felt his breath catch. It was his friend from the bar. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. He stared in shock, trying to reconcile the friendly face he knew with the gravity of the accusations that hung over the courtroom. How could it be the same person? The man who had laughed with him, shared stories with him, and seemed so normal, so nice, was now standing accused of unthinkable crimes. As the trial began, the details of the case were laid out in excruciating detail. My uncle sat in disbelief as he listened to the charges, the evidence, and the accounts of people who had crossed paths with this man in much darker circumstances. Bit by bit, the image of his friendly bar acquaintance was replaced with a stranger, a figure capable of acts that went beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The experience left him shaken to his core. Even after the trial was over and he went back to his normal routine, the memory lingered. How could someone he thought he knew, someone he'd shared drinks and stories with, turn out to be hiding such a dark, sinister side? To this day, my uncle talks about it only occasionally, almost as if speaking about it too often would make it feel too real. But when he does, there's a strange look in his eyes, a mix of disbelief and something close to sadness. It serves as a reminder that sometimes we really have no idea who the people around us truly are. The invitation came in the form of a small, worn-out envelope, with my name scrawled across it in a handwriting that seemed oddly unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. It had been over a decade since I'd last heard anything from my cousin's family, and we'd only spoken briefly a few times by phone. So when I received this unexpected invitation to, surprised, even a bit hesitant. I'd never met my cousin face-to-face before, and all I had was a vague memory of my mother mentioning them from time to time, always with a hint of mystery. The address was peculiar. My GPS couldn't recognize it, displaying an error whenever I tried to load directions. Reluctantly, I resorted to pinning the location on an old, and after a quick glance, I realized it was well off any route I'd ever taken, situated somewhere in the more remote countryside. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I packed my things, got in my car, and set out as twilight began to stretch across the sky. As I drove, the surroundings gradually began to change. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by the dense cover of trees that arched over the road, their dark branches crisscrossing in an almost sinister canopy. I passed endless rows of empty fields, the barn, and not a single house in sight. The sense of isolation crept up on me, making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I glanced at my phone, still no signal. The silence of the countryside was unnerving, broken only by the soft hum of my car's engine. Where the hell am I going? I muttered, casting a wary glance around. But I pressed on, hoping the dinner would be worth this eerie detour. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted an address that closely matched the one on the invitation. The house itself was a grim spectacle, almost hidden by the thicket of trees and undergrowth that had overgrown around it. Moss clung to its sides, and thick vines wove across the crumbling walls. It looked like no one had lived there in years. "This can't be it," I whispered, feeling a strange dread settle over me. Still, as soon as I turned into the driveway, two figures emerged from the dimly lit front porch. They were smiling, waving me over. My aunt and uncle. Despite the unsettling state of the house, they seemed delighted to see me, rushing over to greet me with warm hugs, as though we'd known each other for years. come in," they said, ushering me inside before I could ask any questions. The interior was surprisingly inviting, if a bit worn and outdated. I could smell something delicious wafting from the kitchen, pot roast maybe, and my stomach rumbled. My aunt had gone all out dining room with platters of food and old family photo albums on display, each one yellowed and dusty. They invited me as we waited for my cousin, who they said had run a few errands. We chatted about family, catching up on years' worth of stories. Asked me about my mom, how she was doing. and reminisced about memories I didn't even know they had shared. At times, their knowledge of family details seemed oddly specific, as though they had been watching from afar all these years. I was put off, but chalked it up to the excitement of reconnecting. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, and my aunt's cooking was incredible. We ate until I was stuffed, and afterward they suggested a game of Uno, pulling out an old, worn deck from the shelf. We played for hours, laughing and bantering, and as the sky darkened outside, I realized just how isolated we truly were. There wasn't a sound beyond the walls. No distant hum of cars, no animals, just a dense silence that seemed to press in the house. Eventually, I still hadn't returned. Discomfort and decided it was time to head back. I politely told them I had to explain the next morning. Said it, their expressions, my most driving back. It's dark, and these roads are tricky even in daylight. My uncle chimed in, looking visibly uneasy. Stay the night. We have the guest room all made up for you. It's much safer. The insistence in their voices was unsettling, as if there was something they weren't telling me. I forced a smile and assured them that I could navigate my way back just fine, brushing off their worried glances. But when I stood up, they blocked my way, both of them now with pleading expressions. Please, my aunt whispered. You don't know what's out there. It's not safe to leave now. A strange chill ran down my spine, and a sense of urgency flared within me. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. These people, though polite and familiar, seemed almost desperate to keep me there. It was as if they had been waiting for something. Waiting for me. With a tight smile, I nodded and pretended to relent. Fine, I'll stay, I said, watching their expressions soften with relief. But as soon as they went to fetch the bedding front door, slipping quietly into my car and starting the engine. The wheels crunched over the gravel as I tore out of the driveway, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The house, with its dark windows and shadowed corners, disappeared quickly in my rearview mirror, swallowed up by the night. Driving out of that desolate area was just as difficult as getting there. I was lost for what felt like hours, retracing routes, narrowly avoiding trees that loomed like shadowy figures on either side of the narrow road. At last, a familiar road sign appeared, and I sped up, feeling a wave of relief as I finally left that dreadful place behind. By the time I arrived home, it was well past 11 p.m. Not wanting to wake my parents, I climbed over the fence and slipped in through the back door, careful to make as little noise as possible. But as soon as I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. The lights were on, and there was my mom, sitting at the table, arms crossed and a deeply concerned expression on her face. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I blinked, confused. "I was at Aunt Deborah's house. You knew this. They invited me for dinner." Her face paled. "Aunt Deborah called hours ago," she whispered. "She said you never showed up." I stood there at her, my mind racing. My aunt had called? But I had just spent the entire evening with her and my uncle. I had eaten their food, sat at their table, laughed and played games in their old creaky house. And yet, an icy chill crept over me as I replayed the night's events in my mind, the unsettling sharp clarity, the strange address, the dilapidated house, my cousin who never showed up, and my aunt and uncle's insistence that I stay the night. Till this day, I never knew who I visited. It was a rainy Saturday night. I was out in a restaurant with some friends having a great time. It was almost midnight and we had to leave. We came out, said our goodbyes, and I walked towards my car. I got in and started driving towards my home. I had a long day and was really tired. It was about an hour's drive to my house. On my way, I started to feel sleepy, so I turned on the radio to keep me awake. But there was some problem with the radio. All I could hear was static. I was checking the radio when, suddenly, I saw someone standing straight ahead in the middle of the road. I severed left and applied the brakes hard. The car screeched to a stop. I got out of the car to check, but there was no one there. I looked around where I saw the person standing, but there was no one to be seen around. No person, no tire marks, no indication that anything happened. I thought that my mind was playing tricks on me. I was just really sleepy. I went back to my car, checked the car. Everything seemed to be working except the radio. I was a little shaky after that incident and went on to drive slowly towards my home. I reached home at 1 a.m. Just as I got in, my phone rang. It was Andy, one of the friends with whom I was having dinner earlier tonight. He sounded worried, and he said that he was calling to check that I reached home safely or not. I told him that I was okay and asked what the matter was. He sounded confused and scared. He told that while driving home on the way he saw a guy who looked just like me standing there in the middle of the road. He thought that he had hit me with his car, but when he went out to see, there was no one there. That was very weird. I said that even I experienced the same thing. He said that he had called the other two friends too, and even they saw something similar. He started to panic. I told him not to think about it too much right now and just go to bed. We'll figure this out tomorrow. After the call, I took a nice hot shower and then went to bed. Next morning, the four of us had decided to meet at the same restaurant and discuss the events of last night. I reached there early, only to see that the restaurant had been burned down to the ground. The entire place had just been completely destroyed by the fire. There were paramedics and firemen checking for any survivors and trying to get the dead bodies out. I saw an onlooker standing at the side or the road and went up to him to ask what had happened there. He told that there was a fire last night, a big one. No one survived. All the people were trapped inside the building. No one could call the fire department as all the phone lines were destroyed. The fire engines and the paramedics came in the morning when everyone was already dead. I felt that was very strange, as we had just had dinner there last night. I went towards the road to wait for my friends. As I was going, I saw one of the paramedics taking a dead body out. It was charred, but somehow the face looked familiar. I looked closer and then I remembered where I had seen him. I was talking to him a couple minutes ago. I turned back to see, but he was gone. I started that, did I really see a ghost? The paramedic placed the dead body next to another one. Coincidentally, it also looked familiar. To my surprise, this was the person who I had seen last night. The one I thought that I almost hit with my car. But from his wounds, it looked like he had died there in the fire too. My head was starting to spin. What was going on? It was as if suddenly I was seeing ghosts everywhere. By this time, my friend Andy reached there too and was shocked to see the place burned down. How is that even possible? He said. We were almost here and the owner said close the place. I know. It is all this place suddenly seeing everywhere. What ghosts? Andy asked. I told him about the dead bodies lying there and how I had seen the same guy last night and then today morning too. That is strange, Andy said. I did not see any ghost, but I remember seeing you last night in front of my car." Just as he spoke those words, I saw the paramedics carry out 4 more bodies: Andy, me, and our 2 other friends. All 4 were burned. I looked at Andy, then at my burned and lifeless body, being carried away right in front of my eyes. The house was blanketed in silence, an uneasy calm settling over everything. My husband had left a while ago, just to pick up a few things he'd forgotten, and I'd been waiting for him to come back. I'd tried to distract myself, reading on the couch, but the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, filling the empty space. I kept glancing at the door, hoping he'd return soon. He was taking longer than I expected. Then, just as I began to nod off, a noise jolted me awake. A faint rustling outside the door. I held my breath, listening. It was so quiet I could have dismissed it as the wind, but there it was again, a subtle scratching sound, like someone or something was fumbling with the lock. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was being paranoid. But as I sat up, the sound grew louder, now unmistakably deliberate, as though someone was testing the lock, pushing against it, trying to get in. Fear prickled up my spine, and without thinking, I darted into the bedroom and slipped into the closet, pulling the door almost closing a time through. I crouched low, willing my breath to steady, listening for any movement. And then, just as I huddled into the shadows, I felt an arm wrap around my shoulders, a firm, familiar grip that pulled me back. I almost screamed, but then relief flooded over me. It was my husband. He must have come in quietly, heard the same noises I had, and slipped into the closet to hide with me. I leaned into him, heart still pounding, but now with the comfort of his presence. His arm stayed around me, his hand warm and steady on my shoulder, offering silent reassurance. We crouched there together, side by side, listening. The front door creaked open. Someone had come inside. The soft thud of footsteps filled the house, slow and measured, as if the intruder was in no rush, taking their time with each step. Arm tightened around me, grounding me as the footsteps moved through the rooms, approaching the hallway, drawing closer to our hiding place. I held my breath, every nerve on edge, straining to hear every movement. I could feel my husband's steady presence behind me, his hand gripping mine now, a silent promise that we'd get through this together. But the footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob turned, and the door swung open with a low creak. My husband's grip on my hand grew firmer, anchoring me as we stayed as still as possible, hoping the intruder wouldn't notice us. Silence stretched out, thick and tense, before a familiar voice suddenly broke it. "Hey, babe, I'm back. I forgot my keys." It was my husband's voice, calling out cheerfully from the front door. The world seemed to tilt. My body went rigid, my blood freezing in my veins. My husband was outside. He had just come home. If he was at the door, then who was in the closet with me? A wave of dread crashed over me, a sickening realization twisting in my stomach. I felt the weight of the arm still around my shoulders, warm and solid, the hand still gripping mine, fingers intertwined with mine as if nothing were wrong. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, but fear kept me rooted in place, my body locked in terror. Slowly, carefully, I pulled my hand away, my skin crawling as I felt the grip loosen, allowing my hand to slip free. I could barely breathe, my mind racing, heart pounding as I tried to process the horror of what was happening. Outside, I could hear my husband's footsteps, his voice calling out again, growing louder as he made his way down the hall. "Babe, are you here?" I stumbled forward, almost falling out of the closet, gasping for air as I rushed toward my husband, my body shaking with terror. He caught me, his eyes widening in confusion and concern as he steadied me. I was trembling. Without saying a word, I pointed to the closet. He opened it, but to my surprise, there was nobody inside. This story took place several years ago in a remote region outside the United States. I'll keep the exact location vague for privacy reasons. My name is Ella, and what happened that night started as a simple hiking trip with my close friend, Mia. We never imagined the fun adventure would turn into something straight out of a nightmare. Mia's then partner had suggested the trail to us, claiming it was serene and scenic. I had recently relocated to this country, seeking new experiences. As an avid hiker with a love for exploring new trails across different continents, I thought I had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared us for what lay ahead. The hike began like any other, with laughter and admiration for nature's beauty. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, strange markings began to appear on the trees and rocks. These symbols were unusual, geometric shapes mixed with abstract designs, and they seemed deliberately placed. At first, we thought they were just an odd detail of the trail. As we pressed on, the symbols became more frequent and intricate, as if leading us somewhere. They exuded an unsettling energy, like they belonged to an ancient ritual or belief system we couldn't understand. Then we heard chanting. At first, it was faint and almost melodic, drawing us in with curiosity. But as we followed the sound, we stumbled upon something we wish we hadn't. A group of individuals dressed in dark, hooded robes gathered around a blazing fire. There were about 20 of them, their faces obscured by masks or painted symbols. Some held candles. Others stood motionless, all chanting in a language we couldn't recognize. At the center of their circle was a large altar adorned with candles and objects we couldn't identify. Then, something happened that made our blood run cold. A small animal was brought forward and, in a horrifying moment, was sacrificed. The air was thick with tension, and the ritual seemed to intensify. Suddenly, one of the figures noticed us. The chanting stopped. Heads turned, and just like that, our presence became the focus of their attention. Panic overtook us. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us, the adrenaline coursing through our veins, giving us a burst of speed we didn't know we had. The eerie chants had turned into shouts, and the heavy sound of footsteps behind us echoed in the stillness of the forest. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sent waves of terror through us. The darkness felt alive, closing in around us as we desperately searched for a way to escape. Our path twisted unpredictably, and we struggled to navigate through the dense undergrowth. Neither of us spoke, too breathless and terrified to exchange words. Suddenly, through the shadows, we spotted a structure. An old abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. It looked like something out of a horror movie. The roof sagged in places, the wooden walls were weathered and gray, and ivy had begun to reclaim it. But to us, it was salvation. We dashed inside, slamming the rickety door behind us and sliding the old wooden bolt across to lock it. The cabin smelled of mildew and decay. Its windows were small and dusty, and the faint light of the moon barely illuminated the cramped interior. Our breaths came in ragged gasps as we pressed our ears against the door, listening for the sounds of pursuit. Footsteps approached. They were slow and deliberate now, as if the cultists knew they had us cornered. A low murmur of voices reached us through the cracks in the walls, followed by a soft rattle as someone tested the door. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. We knew we had to be ready. Frantically, we searched the cabin for anything we could use as a weapon. Our hands brushed against cobwebs, damp wood, and dusty shelves. Finally, in a dark corner, we found an old axe. It was heavy, its blade rusted and dull, but it gave us a small shred of hope. Mia clutched it tightly while I scanned the room for something else we could use. And then, silence. The voices and footsteps stopped. We stood frozen, afraid to breathe. The stillness was broken by a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a chorus of distant wolf howls. It was eerie, otherworldly, and seemed to come from all directions. The cultists outside shifted nervously. We could hear their shuffling footsteps. For a moment, it seemed like they were retreating. We stayed inside the cabin for what felt like hours, too scared to move, too afraid to look outside. Finally, we mustered the courage to peek through a crack in the door. The clearing outside was empty. The cultists were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. We knew we couldn't stay there forever. The idea of spending the night in that cabin was unbearable. Gathering our strength, we opened the door cautiously and stepped into the moonlit forest. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. We began to make our way back to the trailhead, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. Just as relief started to creep in, thinking we might actually make it out, two figures emerged from the tree line ahead of us. They were dressed in the same dark robes, their faces hidden by masks. They stood still for a moment, watching us like predators sizing up their prey. And then they began to approach. The glint of long knives in their hands caught the moonlight, and a fresh wave of terror surged through me. My legs felt weak, but we turned to run. Just as they closed in, a deafening gunshot shattered the silence. The figures froze. From the distance, a voice shouted, commanding them to stop. Turning back, we saw a figure standing near the edge of the woods, a forest ranger. He held a rifle, and his powerful voice cut through the tension like a knife. The cultists hesitated, exchanged glances, then retreated into the shadows without a word. The ranger waved us over, his expression stern but reassuring. He led us back to safety, keeping his weapon ready in case the cultists returned. When we reached his outpost, we recounted everything that had happened. He immediately reported the incident, and authorities arrived to investigate. Though the police searched the area thoroughly, they found little evidence to support our story. The symbols we had seen earlier were gone, the fire extinguished, and there was no trace of the cultists. It was as if the entire night had been a twisted illusion. Days passed, and just when we thought we could move on, an ominous letter arrived in the mail. There was no return address, and the handwriting was messy and deliberate, as if meant to conceal the writer's identity. The message was chilling. "We know you saw us. You'll never be safe." We immediately reported it to the police, who took the letter as evidence. But without leads, there wasn't much they could do. The fear that someone was watching us lingered, and we both became hyper-vigilant. Over the next few weeks, reports of strange rituals in the area continued, but they eventually died down. Authorities arrested a few individuals for unrelated crimes in the woods, but none of them matched the description of the cultists we'd encountered. The case was eventually closed, leaving us with more questions than answers. I stopped hiking after that. What used to be a source of joy and peace became a source of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the thought of venturing into the unknown it was terrifying. To this day, I don't know who the cultists were, what their ritual meant, or why they targeted us. But one thing is certain, the woods are no longer a place of peace for me. They're a reminder of how quickly curiosity can turn into danger, and how the unknown is often better left unexplored. Stay safe out there, and trust your instincts. Some things are better left a mystery. When I was 17, I participated from Malaysia. My host family lived in Webster Groves, Missouri, a picturesque suburban town that seemed welcoming enough on the surface. They were a family of 4, a father, a mother, a teenage son, and a daughter just a year younger than me. At first, they seemed warm and kind, almost unnaturally so. I mistook their overzealous hospitality for American friendliness. I didn't realize then how much darker it would become. In the first week, I noticed strange things. Early one morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went to the kitchen, only to find the family gathered around the table in a tight circle. They were murmuring softly, their heads bowed. The moment I stepped into the room, they stopped abruptly and stared at me in silence, their eyes wide and unblinking. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off,